Welcome, everyone. We'll just give everyone a couple more minutes to log in and then we'll get started.
While we're waiting for other folks, can you guys all see the screen? There are 4 questions. I'm going to ask you to just take a moment, write 1 to 4, and put down a numerical answer to those 4 questions. And we'll use that information later on.
All right. Well, it's now 3 after, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. I am Liza Krauser, and I am the virtual room host for today's workshop, An Equity Approach to STEM. I would like to remind you of a few items before our presenter gets started. Please feel free to use the chat box throughout the session and keep yourself on mute while the presenter is speaking. As a reminder, a link to our conference agreements can be found in the chat box. At the end of the workshop session, the presenter will stay online for 20 minutes for question and answer from participants. Also, do not forget to fill out the evaluation at the end of the workshop session to get entered in our drawing for door prizes at the closing session of the day today. Thank you all for being here. Our workshop today is An Equity Approach to STEM and is being facilitated by Maryann Stimmer. So I am pleased to introduce Maryann. Maryann Stimmer has extensive experience in formal and informal STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math education. She conducts professional development and develops programs and materials that address equity issues around gender, race, ethnicity, and disability. She was the science advisor for Playtime is Science, recognized by the U.S. Department of Education as an exemplary program, and is co-author of Playtime is Science for Students with Disabilities. Her publications include After School Science Plus and After School Math Plus. NASA-funded curricula include Ring World, Design a Discovery Mission, and Exploring the Solar System. She designed and implemented the FUSE model used by the After School Corporation, TASC, and replicated within other jurisdictions attempting to institutionalize STEM programming. She serves on the National Science Teacher Association's Informal Science Committee and affiliate Science Education for Students with Disabilities. Ms. Stimmer is the recipient of the 2008 NSTA Distinguished Informal Educator Award, the 2009 After School Experience Excellence Award, and the NYC Reliance Award in Education. So thank you so much. Welcome all, and we're excited to hear what you have to say, Maryann.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you all for choosing this workshop. I hope you walk away with what you came for. I'm going to move these 4 questions. If you haven't had a chance to read them or answer them, you'll have an opportunity later. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about an equity approach to STEM, and some folks have a little bit of trouble with the idea of equity and STEM, thinking, we do what we do for everyone, and uh, I hope that we can talk through that in the next 45 minutes or so. So I want to start with something totally off the board anyway. This is an early telephone. Um, it's made out of wood and metal. There was no plastic. And this is one of the very earliest models. This is a present day telephone. And you can see there's a lot of difference in the time between telephones were invented and the selling of the iPhone 12 now. We've made remarkable progress. The phones can do all kinds of things besides for just letting you talk to somebody someplace else. You can text, you have messages, you can listen to music, you can take a picture, whatever. So we are light years away from those original phones. Here's an old time car, and you can see it has wheels where you can actually see the axle, and the actual headlights were considered a huge accommodation and invention. And here's a car, present day car, and actually this car is considered to be the most expensive on the market. It does everything for you. If you find a parking space that is only 4 inches larger than the car, it will park the car for you. Here's an early classroom in the United States. And you'll notice the kids are in nice little neat rows. They're all facing forward. They're all paying attention. They're all following the rules. And here's a present day classroom where the kids are all sitting in neat little rows. They're all paying attention, and they're all sitting in the front of the room. So how is it that we have prioritized changes to telephones and cars and a million other things, but somehow we haven't changed education? We haven't moved forward. We haven't made the changes that we need to make when, let me go back a minute. When these classrooms were devised, it was to get kids ready to take part in industry, to work in factories. It was post-industrial revolution. It was so that someday they would be a part of the workforce. And actually, once they got to high school, girls didn't even stay in high school because they weren't considered essential workers, a phrase that's become very popular lately. And now we are getting kids ready to take part in the technological revolution, to be global employees. And the skills they need are things like creativity, as opposed to just following the rules, and the ability to think outside the box and develop norms as a community instead of just following the rules. So what hasn't changed and what's changed? What hasn't changed isn't just the format or the classroom. What hasn't changed is how we give instruction. What has changed is the readiness to take part in employment after graduation. At the time of that older picture, better than 90% of all kids when they graduated school or when they left the 8th grade for girls were employable and employed. Now, people are not so employable, or they are underemployed. Last year, the United States exported 1.4 million jobs overseas. People tell this fantasy that it's because people will do it cheaper other places. That's absolutely untrue. Even if the actual labor is getting paid less, those companies pay a premium, they pay a tax, they pay an import tax. It would be cheaper and better if we had an American workforce. So I want you to hold that in the back of your head for a minute, and I want you to think about this. How do educators prioritize the educational goals? So First and foremost, we are very concerned about performance. We really, really want kids to do well on the test. In many big cities, they publish the scores of different school districts in the papers, in the newspapers, because it's so important. And that's where the focus is. And that's why we have standards. Second, and this is because of some research that's been done in the last 15 years, we understand how important engagement is, right? Interest and excitement. And last, we understand a little bit about identity. So the lineup in the US is performance, engagement, identity. I'm good at science and math. I like what I do. Someday I can have a STEM career. And here's the truth, that in point of fact, the best predictor is actually identity. The second best predictor is engagement, and the least relevant predictor is performance. So the actual lineup is identity, engagement, performance. So it's, I am a scientist or a mathematician or an engineer. I like what I do, and I can find out what I need to know. And I will tell you, I backed into education. I'm a microbiologist. And when we were in the lab, we were doing research that was funded by the National Institute of Health. And none of us had the answer. That's why we were there. That's what we were researching. We were looking to find out, but we were all scientists and we were all highly engaged in what we were doing. And the research now bears that out for the last 10 plus years. So when you ask kids now to draw a picture of a scientist, this is who they draw: an old white guy with wild hair and a lab coat and a pocket protector and sometimes a bow tie, and that's because of Bill Nye. But is anyone's identity expressed in this picture? Maybe if you're a little white boy and you want to be an old guy with wild hair and a lab coat, but for most people, it's just not relevant. So here are those 4 questions that we looked at up front, and I'm going to ask you to unmute yourselves. And if anybody answered a question or would like to share their answer, just call it out. For question 1, what % of students entering college intending to major in STEM change their major in the first 2 years? Anyone?
70%?
I'm sorry?
70%?
Actually, that's very, very good. It's between 50 and 80%, depending on your source. So the majority of people who think they are going to have a STEM career change their minds and do something else within the first 2 years of college. That was great. Thank you. Second question, according to the PISA assessment, where does the US rank in math and science? Again, anyone? Somebody?
52.
Actually, in math, we're number 36, and in science, we're number 18. We're behind Latvia. Not that I have anything against Latvia, but if you think about the per capita investment in education, we are investing many times what they are, and we're not getting the payoff. And so when we say we're number 1, we're not even in the top 10. Third question, according to the Department of Labor, what percentage of all jobs require a competency in math? Anyone?
I would think 100%, but I'm doubting that's the truth to that.
Who said that?
Brittany Balthaser, I would think it's 100%. That you would think it would be 100%, but it's probably not.
Brittany, you get a gold star. It is 100%. The Department of Labor says all jobs, every single job requires a competency in math. But the percentage of people who graduate high school, not college, but who graduate high school with a competency in math is about 28%. So about 3/4 of the people who are entering the workforce do not have the required math competency. And the last question, how much more are you going to make if you have a STEM career? Anyone take a guess?
I was thinking at least 25, like 25,000, 25% to 50% more.
Is that Brittany again?
Yes. I don't know.
You're actually great at this.
I don't know why.
You are great at this. It's between 19 and 20, the average is between 19 and 27,000 per year more in a STEM career than in a non-STEM career. So let me just summarize what we've done so far with the slides and these questions, right? So youth are not being prepared to be employed. They're not being prepared to be competitive. And there's one other piece of important information I'd like to share. If you look at the percent of the population and by group, and then the percent of science and engineering degrees, the numbers are fascinating. So about 67% of the population in the US is white, but 74% of all the engineers and scientists are white. Asian and Pacific Islanders by percent is about 5%, but who ends up in the careers, 8%. And then we look at these bottom 5 groups. African Americans are 12% of the population, but not quite 8% of STEM degrees. Hispanic, which is the language they use, is about 14.5% of the population, but only over 6%. American Indian and Alaskan Native are not quite 1% of the population, and they're not quite nothing in terms of STEM degrees. Unknown, people who don't want to declare, again, that number is higher, and we have to just wonder who those people are, if they're not African American, Hispanic, or American Indian, and then people with disabilities as well. So, and now this is the most fascinating slide. This is the percent of the population that has a positive STEM ID. So for white people who are 67% of the population, 73% of them have a positive ID. And look at the number of STEM degrees. Asian and Pacific Islanders, again, there's a high correlation. Look at African American, 12% of the population, and look at the percent of STEM degrees and identity. And if you follow those numbers down, there's a correlation between who ends up with a STEM degree and who has a positive STEM identity. So, question is, why an equity approach? Well, we're not preparing youth for this century. We know what works, right? Developing positive STEM identity. We're just not doing it in school. There's a huge economic impact on the nation and on individuals, especially those bottom 5 groups, what we call the underrepresented groups. So it's not just the right thing to do, it's the economically smart thing to do. And again, the impact on underrepresented groups is higher. So we need to think about equity. So that was all the bad news. Because what do we know that we can change, that we can use to change things, to improve things, to make things better? And we actually know quite a lot. We know that the greatest need and the greatest opportunity for improvement comes from kids from low socioeconomic backgrounds. So poor kids, girls, and across any demographic. White people, Black people, Latino people, people with disabilities, across any demographic, women are more underrepresented than men. So kids of color, kids with disabilities, kids from low income backgrounds. But the nice thing is that we are in the perfect setting to address this. So who's underrepresented? Who's in after school? more girls than boys, more kids of color, more kids by percentage with disabilities, and more kids from low income backgrounds. And after school, there are opportunities for hands-on, minds-on experiences. We are not bound by the constraints that day school educators are bound, right? A lot of times they have a pacing calendar, a scope and sequence. In after school, if you want to, fly a plane out the window and then go see where it lands, you can pretty much do it. In school, you can't do it. And after school, it is easier to address the issue of STEM identity because in after school, the educators are more likely to be from the same demographic as the kids, socioeconomic demographic. And you have built-in role models. But the big thing is the flexible setting. So the setting and the staff. So it's the perfect audience meets the perfect setting to address this. We know that what works, there are research-based strategies. We know that if you attach a literacy activity to the STEM activity, we know that if you talk about a role model in relation to the activity, you're talking about space geology, so you talk about Adriana Ocampo. We know that if you attach careers, if you say, well, the thing you're learning today could turn you into an engineer, it could turn you into a research biologist, whatever. We know the research says the kids are more likely to be engaged in the activity, more likely to develop a STEM identity, and more likely to end up in one of those careers. We know that if you connect to families, kids are more likely to be engaged and more likely to have a STEM identity. And we know when you position the kids as experts, if you let the kids teach the STEM to another child, to their sibling, to their parents, that they are more likely to develop a positive STEM identity. We know that if you use an evidence-based curriculum, so that it was developed and some evaluation was done and that it works, that it has those identity strategies attached to it, we know that it's going to work and the kids are going to develop a positive STEM identity. And I should also mention that kids who develop a positive STEM identity are also going to outperform their peers on the standardized tests. And that's because they are engaged, and that is because they are motivated to learn the material. We know that if you change the mindset, if you change attitudes, if you change science literacy, if you dispel the stereotypes, we know kids will develop a STEM identity, and we know they will be more engaged. We know that the right kind of facilitation makes a big difference. If it's fun, if it uses everyday objects. And part of the reason for that is you want kids to know science happens around them all day, every day. So, the classic example is oobleck. If they're mixing cornstarch and food coloring and water and making a non-Newtonian substance, it is much more powerful than if you have some material from a kit. And then the message to the kids, and research bears this out, is that if you have the kit, you can do science. Whereas if you use stuff from the kitchen or the supermarket or Home Depot or wherever, the kids get the message science is part of your everyday life. And that also supports identity. So I always discourage the use of kits. I'm not against a box of materials that you've collected and handing to the staff, but a commercial kit is not a great idea. And then the other thing is co-inquiry. And co-inquiry is kind of a new idea. So we've always supported inquiry-based learning. Co-inquiry is where the educator is learning along with the child, so that when the child says, well, how come if I press the oobleck hard, it acts like a solid, but if I touch it softly, it acts like a liquid. So in school, the teacher might explain it's a non-Newtonian substance, that it reacts to pressure and not temperature, and so on. And so the minute the kids leave the classroom, they're going to forget. But if the after school facilitator says, that's a really interesting question, let's find out together, that's powerful. It affirms their curiosity, it affirms the inquiry process, and it affirms the role model relationship. I just mentioned role models, having the freedom and flexibility to do what you want. So if the kids say, you know, I'm really interested in how planes fly, and you say, oh, well, we can do this activity where whatever. Teachers, and I admire and respect teachers, teachers don't have that kind of flexibility. They have the program for the year, maybe they have a textbook, maybe they have a set of kits they're using, and they have to get from A to Z by the end of the year. And after school, there's no rules, there's lots of flexibility, and it is very, very easy to work from the kids' curiosity. The other thing is that in after school, you don't actually have to stay in the room. You can go outside, you can send information home. It can get a little bit messy. And that's another thing teachers don't always have the flexibility to do. Making the kids the experts, having the kids teach. These are different culminating events. The one on the bottom left is from the US Space and Rocket Center. The one in the center is from the Chinese American Planning Council here in Queens. And the one on the bottom right is actually Chinese American Planning Council also. And the one on the top left is from the New York Hall of Science. And all of these kids participated in an activity called the Built Environment, where they learned about scale and ratio. They created blueprints, and then they built models. But what was really interesting about the models they built, they reflected the culture of the group. It was an opportunity through science, through science and math, to express what their values were. So on the bottom left, that's in Huntsville, Alabama, and the Space and Rocket Center. Those kids' parents work in the space industry, a lot of them at Boeing or some at NASA. And they built a community on Mars. And it's really interesting. On Mars, there is a house of worship. It's not a church, it's not a synagogue, it's not a mosque. It is a house of worship where everyone is welcome. On the top left and on the bottom right, the kids built communities that could survive a natural disaster. And they were replying to 2 different natural disasters. The one on the top left was an earthquake in the Caribbean, where many of the kids had families. And the one on the bottom right was a response to a tsunami. And the kids built in tsunami breakers. They invented it. They looked up the physics of it in order to be able to include it. So it's really interesting that, you know, when we think of teaching science and math, we think of only the content, but it is actually all about the youth identity, who they are, what they care about, and what's important to them. I want to talk about involving families for just a second and how incredibly important that is. The research says that the #1 influencer on whether a person will have a STEM career or be successful in a STEM classroom is their parents' attitude towards it. The research was originally done around girls, and what they found was that the father's opinion of what the girl was doing was the primary influencer, and second, the mother. But then when they did boys, they found the same thing. So you want to let parents know what it is the kids are doing. And you want to involve them as much as possible. You want to send home a note. You know, today the kids dropped eggs out of the window and in a crash-proof container made of straws and styrofoam. And maybe try this at home. Whoop. We know that there are years and years and years of research that tell us how important identity is and how important engagement is. And I just put the first few here, but anyone who's interested, my email's on the last slide, email me and I will send you 5 pages of citations that talk about what's important in terms of STEM education. We know that there are lots of tools and initiatives to support what you're doing. The Mott Foundation and your network is a Mott network, supported the guide to an equity approach to STEM. In it, there's an equity checklist, some vetted curricula, research-based strategies, and a curriculum vetting tool. I'm going to just review those briefly in a second. Evaluation tools. There's the DOS instrument, which you probably know about. I know some of the folks in your network have had the training. And there's the focus instrument. Both of these will let you know, are the kids getting the message? Are they engaged? Are they developing a STEM identity? And then there's some great initiatives out here. The one I included is the Million Girl Moonshot, which is supported by the STEM Next Opportunity Fund and the Mott Foundation. And that brings lots and lots of resources to your network. So I just want to talk about the equity checklist for a second. We tend to think that what we're doing is fair and equitable. After all, we're doing the same thing for everybody in the room. But truthfully, the same thing for everybody in the room doesn't really work. So for example, girls are more likely to do well if they're working in a cooperative environment with another student. Boys do extremely well in a cooperative environment, but they also can fly solo. Are the materials culturally familiar? Is every child's voice heard, and are they encouraged to participate? And do the activities support the idea of the stereotypes? So there are things that we kind of don't think about. The equity checklist makes it easy. And that's one of the documents I'm happy to send. Research-based strategies, so working collaboratively, professional development. We know when sites invest in professional development that your facilitators do a much better job. Is STEM an expectation or is it a treat? Are we doing things to support STEM identity? Are we involving families? Is it fun? Because being silly is a great strategy for STEM. Are we connecting to mentors? Because that's really, really important. Is it cheap and easy to do? And that's also in the guide I'm happy to send. And then there's the curriculum vetting tool. The curriculum vetting tool has some really interesting stuff. It asks, is the STEM rigorous? I mean, that's a really important thing, right? We're not saying make it easy. We're saying make it fun and interesting. The other thing is, and I'm just going to take a moment to sidetrack a tiny bit and say, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't necessarily write curriculum. Because what happens is when people write curriculum, they write a science or a math or an engineering activity. They leave out the literacy piece. They leave out the career piece. They leave out the cultural connections. Whereas if you use a vetted curriculum, and I can give you a list, all of that stuff is embedded. It's not extra. When you're ready to write curriculum is after you've used a vetted curriculum, and now you're just building on kids' curiosity. And they say, well, what happens when I, plant bean seeds upside down? Does it slow down until we see the first leaves? Okay, let's figure that out. So the research-based strategies that I mentioned. And so I'm going to ask that we go into a breakout room, maybe just 2 rooms. And I'm going to ask the people in the breakout room to select an activity that you've done, a STEM activity that you've done. But I'm going to ask you to very briefly add a literacy activity. You don't have to do it necessarily, although it would be lovely if you did. Add a role model piece, add a career piece, add a family piece, and write a piece that says students are experts. So you can do the ones that I've written here, or under these headings, you can add your own activity. And I'm looking at the clock and I'm gonna say, we have 10 minutes to do that. Does that work for everyone? And we should be getting into the breakout rooms. Hi, am I still sharing my screen? Somebody just, no?
Not
Yes.
currently, no.
Well, I see you.
You see me, but you don't see my PowerPoint.
Right.
How do we fix that?
Do you see the share screen option at the bottom of your window? There you go. Now it's working.
Thank you. So we're just waiting for the other breakout room to return.
Yeah, just return.
Oh, excellent. Everybody's back?
Yeah, everybody's back.
Okay, great. So I'm going to ask somebody from the other group to kind of report out what was your activity and what strategies did you add? Somebody?
I was
Oh.
going to say, I don't think we selected an activity per se. We were discussing different activities and how we would tie in different components like literacy or social studies, or, you know, like I do with nutrition with like our camps up here in Fairbanks as a component with literacy and, you know, nutrition and physical activity. So we didn't have a specific activity, but we discussed kind of around different STEM subjects, how we would tie in. With literacy, I think we mentioned, you know, books, tying in books or stories with, you know, tying it into the STEM project. Here in Fairbanks, we do some STEM camps with 4-H, and I'm a nutrition educator, so we usually try to tie in a recipe or a set of recipes that they can read and make their own item with the tie into the science project, just to have something as a snack with their science project. And I will usually tie in like a little bit of knowledge on like eating in space, like what was eating in space like when it first started and how it's changed. So I, you know, tying in those different components in there. I think we talked about Magic School Bus being a great way to tie in the science and reading component with the younger kids. I don't know, Anna, we mentioned some other things. Do you have any comments?
We also talked about the arts a little bit too, about how we can kind of, you know, find ways to incorporate STEM into the arts, and especially since arts and PE are kind of the first to go in a school budget, how we can kind of incorporate that a little bit more into our STEM activities. I don't know if I was missing anything else, but if anyone else in my group, if I forgot anything you want to add on, feel free in the chat or verbally or however.
Thank you both. Somebody from the other group want to just fill us in a little bit? I hate to call on anybody, but Valerie, do you want to share a little bit? You had some good ideas.
This is Eric, and I can jump in too, Valerie, if you'd like.
Thank you, Eric.
Go for it,
Okay.
Eric. Go for it, Eric.
I wasn't sure if you were trying to unmute. I don't want to step on your sharing ability.
Go ahead. Men first.
We talked in our group about potentially engaging in a surface tension project and the different ways that we could connect students with professionals in order to have a deeper understanding of careers that might be available for them. And so we talked about potentially looking at NASA outreach, because NASA, as a large science organization, seeks to connect scientists with students on a frequent basis and has avenues for doing so. There are also some organizations right here in Alaska, like the Arctic Research Consortium, that have really, really great resources for connecting active science and research to current K-12 classrooms and after-school programs. And then as far as connecting communities with that as well, you could set up those science projects to be done along with families. So it becomes a holistic family participatory research project. And then in order to share that out with others and help facilitate students becoming experts, you could set them up as citizen scientists who then get to teach other community members or other students or other members of the after school programs that they're a part of, to share that knowledge out and to give them a lot of validity in why they're collecting that data or doing that research or engaging in that project. So it really becomes a meaningful pursuit for everybody involved.
Thank you. Good job, Eric. So again, when you add these pieces to whatever activity is you're doing, you are supporting STEM identity. And I'm going to say it again. STEM identity is the best predictor. You are also increasing engagement, and engagement is the second best predictor. So any questions from anybody? All right, we're getting close. Oh, why is this not? Let's see if this works. There we go. So here are the takeaways. An equity approach to STEM works for everyone in the room. Nobody gets left out. So if we say cooperative learning works better for girls than other ways, it also works for boys. Using culturally familiar materials works for everyone. Using those research-based strategies works for everyone. You are not leaving anybody out. I also want you to walk away knowing identity is the best predictor of success and retention in the pipeline, and that those strategies that we talked about will support that. I want you to walk away thinking equity-based curriculum is a great first step. And I will give you a list of equity-based curriculum. I will give you the curriculum vetting tool. Don't reinvent the wheel unless your back is to the wall. A lot of really great stuff is free. A lot of really great stuff. Use culturally familiar materials. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to knock yourself out. And then, although we didn't talk a lot about this earlier on, we did say out of school time is the perfect setting, but I want you to think about how good youth development, the things that are your goals in youth development, are actually aligned with what really good STEM is. So here's my email. Any of the information you want, the vetting tool, the guide, information on Million Girls, the research, whatever it is you want, I am happy to send you. But the other thing on this slide is a picture of a starfish, and I want to tell you a story. So there's a little girl and she's walking along the beach. And as she's walking along, she sees all these starfish. It's a red tide and they're all washing up. And she's running back and forth and she's picking them up and she's throwing them into the ocean. And this educator is walking along the shore and sees what the little girl is doing and feels terrible for her because there are thousands of starfish on the beach and there's no way she's going to get to them all. And she says to the little girl, you know, honey, I think it's wonderful that you're trying, but what difference can you possibly make? And the little girl picks up a starfish, shows it to the educator and says, you see this one? It makes a difference to this one. And she throws it into the ocean. And although I have asked you to do an enormous amount of stuff, be the educator who makes a difference, even if it's just to one. So thank you for choosing this workshop. Take my email. Anything I can do, I am happy to do. I'm supported by the STEM Next Opportunity Fund to provide technical assistance to your network. And I'm gonna do that right now.
Well, please join me in thanking Maryann for today's workshop. Thank you, Maryann. We greatly appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Everyone who is in here, please make sure to fill out your evaluation for this workshop so you can get entered in our drawing for door prizes at our final session of the day today. I think Anna just put the link in the chat box.
Any questions from anyone?
I have a question.
Go for it, Anna.
It might be actually two separate questions, but so I was curious when you had showed the slide earlier about you know, who is in STEM careers, and my question would be what is some techniques or ideas to specifically reach girls? And I just saw this in an article somewhere, so I'm trying to change the way I say it. So instead of underrepresented populations, historically overlooked populations in STEM, how can we specifically reach
Girls?
girls and, like, you know, Alaska Native students? How do we get them excited about STEM when they've typically been, you know, overlooked?
Make it about them. So what are the girls interested in? What do they want to learn? What do the Alaska Natives want to learn? Also, Alaska Natives have lived there a really long time in what can be a hostile environment sometime. So they know a lot of STEM. They know a lot of science engineering that have enabled them to be successful. Maybe learn from them. Have them share their science and math. I will tell you that I'm an amateur astronomer, and I was in Maine with the Wabanaki, and I brought my telescope with me. And after doing all day math training, I said, oh, by the way, I have my telescope with me, and tonight I'm going to be, you know, looking at, and I tell them what I'm going to be looking at. And whoever would like to is welcome to join me. And the educator who was the liaison said, oh no, the sky is sacred. We do not use a telescope. So I said, oh, I apologize. I had no idea. I absolutely will not take my telescope out of the trunk of the car. And she said, but come and we'll look at the night sky. I will tell you, it was probably the best astronomy lesson I ever had. And she said, you know, thousands of years, my people have lived here. We've looked at the night sky. We've learned some stuff. And it was, you know, a learning. I learned something that day. And I encourage whoever you're working with, ask them some of what they know, learn from them, you know, and it becomes the opportunity to be the experts, to find the role models, which are all research-based strategies. The other is, make it about the kids, especially for girls. Do it in groups, do it cooperatively. Don't give individual assignments. There are lots of resources out there for girls. Some great curriculum. Sci Girls is terrific. TechBridge is really, really excellent. So use a curriculum that was developed for use with girls and that will support them and has embedded research-based strategies. That was a good question, Anna. Thank you. Anybody else? No?
I think there was one in the chat. Jazz, I don't want to steal your thunder, but I can read it aloud if you would like me to. Asked if there's anything specific that should be done differently in early childhood settings.
Well, number one is safety. Little guys tend to put stuff in their mouth. Little guys tend to not think before they act. So safety, but otherwise, I would not underestimate their capacity to do inquiry. They are born doing inquiry. It's why little kids take out the pots and bang on them. And it's why they, you know, stuff a bean up their nose. What they're looking for is a spatial relationship. What's bigger, my nostril or the bean? Kids are born doing inquiry. Just build on it. What is it you want to know? And how can we find out together? And actually, just as an aside, I wouldn't just hand out information to kids. I would teach them how to get information. If you hand out information, they'll forget it. But if you teach them how to get it, how to find out, how to do inquiry, that's a gift that will last forever. What does that say? I'm waiting for the bean in the nose.
I have a 2-year-old, so I'm waiting for when that happens.
Yeah, a neighbor of mine, child was breathing funny, and she's looking and looking, and she sees this little green thing in the nostril. And it turns out not only did he stuff a bean up his nose several days ago, but the moisture, the humidity, the heat made it sprout in the sinus. And what was coming out were the leaves of the bean sprout. And she had to go to the hospital, and they pulled it out. She said the doctor in the ER kept saying to people, "You gotta see this, you gotta see this." He was very excited. So things happen. That's a whole other kind of science. Other questions? Burning issues, things you just want to say? No? Make sure you have my email. I'd love to hear from you. Any resource that I can share with you, I am absolutely happy to do. And thank you all.
I have one thing I wanted to say real quick.
Go for it, Valerie.
Oh, I just hate that, I guess in my era when I was growing up and where I lived at, it just wasn't pushed, for females to get the STEM training or whatever, or even, I mean, it was just, you're right, it was always the guys, and whatever. And so like now when I look at young people, the younger people, I mean, girls, and sometimes some of my people that I work with or whatever, sometimes they always saying, "Oh, you always pushing for the girls." I am. I'm serious girl power. Of course, I push the guys too. I raised 2 sons, so but it's just, they have every opportunity to get this,
Yeah.
and to do well and to excel. So
Yeah. You want to hear a personal story? I'm turning into my mother. So I went to a specialized science high school in New York City. There were 3, only 1 took girls. When I went to college, I had a double major in bio and chem. And in my sophomore year, I wanted to take organic chemistry. And in the olden days, the way you registered for a class, you went to the gym and the head of the department would be sitting at a table with a bunch of IBM punch cards. And if there were 150 spots in the lecture, there were 150 cards. And then there were like 10 override cards. And so I get there and I say to the guy, Chem 201, please. And he held the card and he looks at me and he says, "Are you a serious science student or are you just looking for a pre-med husband?"
What?
And I was like, well, it was a very long time ago.
Right.
It was 1972.
Right. Okay.
But I was like, "Mister, you can't possibly know who I am and how in danger your life is right now." And I just said, "Give me the card, please."
Right.
A few years ago, my daughter was in college, and although she was a psych major, she really likes math and statistics. And it was the second half of her junior year, and she was taking a very high level course. And she calls me up the first day and she says, "This guy is teaching the class. I don't know what he's thinking. There's only 10 of us in the class, and he made a point of saying there were 2 girls, and he's never had a girl at this level before, and he's happy to see us." She said it felt welcoming, but it felt weird.
Mm-hmm.
A few weeks later, he made some other comment when the other girl dropped out. Midterm comes, and Christine takes the midterm and she gets a 65, which for Chris is a horrible grade. Right. She's on academic scholarship. She's a high performing student. Right. And she said, "I can't believe I didn't do well. I thought I was doing so well in the class and whatever." I said, go talk to the teacher. So she goes and she calls me up and she tells me he said to her, you know, have you been to the math lab? And she says, yes. And I thought I was doing really well. And he said, well, I could see you're really trying, and I don't want you to feel punished. So even though you've taken the midterm, you can drop the class if you like without penalty. So she says, no, I really, I'll drop below 16 credits. I'll lose my scholarship. I can't drop the class. He says, I don't know what to tell you except maybe see if the guys in the class can help you. So she says to the guys after the next class, do you want to form a study group wherever, where she finds out her 65 was the highest grade in the class.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
So they finish the semester. She's working with the guys. They take their finals. She knows she has gotten the highest grade on the final. And when he posts, and one other guy drops, when he posts the 8 grades of the 8 remaining students, she has gotten a B or a B plus, and there are 2 A's, but she knows she's been outperforming the guys.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, I can't believe it, whatever. I said, listen, Christine, file a Title IX complaint against this guy. Make his life miserable. Go to the chair of the department because he really, whatever. She tells me, I'm not like you. I'm not a troublemaker. I said, then eat the B. And the next girl he does that to, it's your fault. She says, I don't know what to do. That night she calls me up and she says, I got an A. I said, oh, that's wonderful. What happened? She says, I went to him and I pointed out, my grades have been the highest. My paper got the highest grade, and I participate in every class, and yet I didn't get the highest grade. And I was wondering if it was because I was a girl. And he didn't know what to say to that. And she said, and then I told him, my mother works for a feminist organization. She made that up. And said, I should file a Title IX complaint. But I just wanted to make sure there was no mistake. And sure enough, he said it was a mistake. And he gave her an A.
Okay.
And I thought to myself, perhaps the educators haven't changed, but the students sure have.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Not to take that.
Very, very wow. I might have to share your story.
Feel free.
Okay.
It's interesting. I was at that college the following fall and I met him. And he says, oh, you're Christine Stimmer's mother? I said, yes. And he says, it was so odd and whatever. And he said, I really didn't realize that I was thinking of her differently because she's female.
Oh.
And he said, I have 2 girls in my class this semester, and I'm just really trying to, not do that. And I thought, that's great.
Yeah.
But
that's good.
See, I told you a long, complicated story. I really have turned into my mother. Other questions, comments, burning issues?
I wanted to say is that I grew up in an area that's and I grew up in Utah, southern Utah, very religious area, and women, I'm not Mormon, but the predominant religion is Mormon, and so women are usually expected to get married quite quickly. And so I don't, just like in areas, this could be an issue in some places where, women are not pushed to go into STEM because, STEM requires a lot of time in college. And even now it's still like women are supposed to get married young still and have babies and, take care of a household. And I think we're still fighting against that assumption for women even now. And I know like my grandparents that that was the norm, but even now we're still fighting it in some states with the predominant religion, depending on where you are. I don't think so much here, but I think I see it. I left home and I left the state because I knew if I stayed there wouldn't be any opportunity for me to do anything anyway, because the expectation for women is pretty low.
Right. Right. It's really interesting, though. We can't blame everybody else in terms of STEM education. We have to take some responsibility. It's a really interesting study looking at girls in school and how they perceive their performance, and boys in school and how they perceive their performance. And what they found is if a boy gets a C on a test or on a course, he says, oh, great, I passed, whatever. If a girl gets like a 90 on a test, I could have gotten 100 if I had only tried harder, if I'd only studied harder, whatever. Girls tend to be much harder on themselves and not acknowledge their achievements, whereas boys tend to be kinder to themselves, and whatever achievements they have, they acknowledge. And that's a really important thing, you know, because it speaks to identity. You know, if I had tried harder, I could have been a STEM major, but it just wasn't in it for me, you know. It's how we perceive ourselves as well. I'm not saying that's what happened in Utah. I work a lot with Ben Trentleman, the head of the Mott network in Utah, the after school network, and I see what goes on, but you know, we just need to be aware. I respect the fact that you move someplace else and are making a fresh start. That's fabulous.
Mhm.
Other comments?
I just got a notice that there's been a Zoom. Oh, everything's okay, actually. Never mind.
Okay.
We can stick with our additional 8 minutes.
Questions I can answer for anybody? Anybody want to tell a story since I made you listen to mine? No. I'm going to ask a question then. Somebody signed in as Jazz. That's fascinating. Want to share that? What makes you Jazz? Jazz says, LOL. Okay. Oh, Jazzanne. Thank you. Well, that's a great nickname. Well, we don't have to stick around for the 8 minutes. If you guys are done, you can take a 7-minute break before your next event. Thank you all for joining me for this part of the day. I appreciate it. And again, you have my email. Anything I can do to help, I'm happy to do. So long, everybody. Bye.